USA. So Seva USA is an organization that works in the community, not just in the US, but also across the globe. And our main mission is to help the community, make the community aware and make them empowered so that they can be safe and they can in turn help others. So Seva International Bay Area Family Services Chapter mission is to bring different different seminars which help our community in different areas. So when some of the seminars that we are planning in this online platform, actually we have been conducting these seminars since the COVID has hit us. We have had many seminars across the United States brought by different chapters of Seva International. And Seva International Bay Area chapter have brought some very interesting seminars, which also included stress management through meditation, which was done by our very own volunteer, Monica Kamran, who is also with us here. And what we are planning to bring in the future, some of the seminars are college preparedness in the COVID situation, in the pandemic situation. We are planning to bring some topic, which is stress management, which is very important. We are planning to bring alternative medicine and its effect on current situation. So please be prepared to attend these seminars, and I request all of you to join. Before taking too long, I'm going to introduce you to Monica Kamran, who is here, who is part of NCAPDA, which is National Coalition Against Prescription Drug Abuse. And she will be the facilitator of today's workshop, and she will introduce you, all of us, to the host of our show. Thank you. Over to you, Monica. Monica, you're on.
Okay, got it now. Yes. Okay, thank you so much, Nivedita, and thank you to Seva, which is such a wonderful organization, and all the volunteers for letting NCAPDA be a part of the webinars that you are offering. Before I begin, I just wanted to say that this session is being recorded and we are live on Facebook. So if you would like to switch off your cameras, we totally understand that. And Seva does not take any liability for any action that the participants may choose to take based on the contents of this seminar. Now, today's topic is prescription drug abuse awareness, which is a big, serious problem. In fact, national studies show that many teens are more likely to have abused a prescription drug rather than an illegal street drug, something that I was also not aware of. Many of us think that prescription drugs are safe because they're prescribed by a doctor, but taking them for non-medicinal use or taking an overdose just to self-medicate can be very, very dangerous. So today we have with us April Rivero, who is the founder and executive director of the National Coalition Against Prescription Drug Abuse. She leads NCAPDA's efforts to prevent prescription drug-related addiction and overdose deaths through community education, through policy change, and legislation advocacy at the local, state, and federal levels. She also leads the Contra Costa County Meds Coalition and is an advisor to various other California and national-based coalitions. I can say that as a personal experience that she is indeed an inspiration and has educated our community so much. So over to you, April. Thank you for being here today.
Oh gosh, thank you so much, Monica, and also, of course, to Seva for allowing us to have this opportunity to outreach to our community members. So I am going to share my screen, and that'll give you some visuals to be looking at, so you're not just hearing me talk. We do have some other members of our team that will be following me, and it'll be an exciting opportunity, I think, for everybody to share on a real personal level and to answer questions that people have. So let's get started here. So not moving here. It seems like we often have a little issue with the very first slide. There we go. So we are a nonprofit organization founded in 2010, and we are resident here. Excuse me? I'm hearing some background. Is somebody having a problem with the screen?
No, we are good.
You'll able to see it, right, Monica? Okay, just to be sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
we can see that. Yeah.
Okay.
And before you begin, April, just one more addition. If anybody has any questions, just put it in the chat and we'll take your questions later.
Yeah, that'll be great. We will have a Q&A session. So anyway, this is just a really good synopsis of our organization. We're basically doing everything we can through education, community education, policy change, and legislative advocacy to prevent prescription drug overdose deaths and addiction that can lead to those overdose deaths. And we will talk to anybody. So if anyone is on the call here or watching on Facebook who would like to invite us to give another presentation to another group of people, we are very happy to do that. We will talk to anyone. The reason for my passion, my personal passion around this issue for the past 10 years was unfortunately due to this devastating loss of my son, Joey, who was 21 years old and a senior at Arizona State University, only 5 months away from graduating from college, when on a Friday afternoon, or actually evening, we got a call that changed our lives forever, letting us know that Joey had been found in his off-campus apartment that he was sharing with 2 of his fraternity brothers who he'd been going to school at ASU with for all the 4 years he had been there. And the bottom line is over about an hour time frame, when we were desperately trying to find out what was going on. Initially, we didn't realize he had passed away. We were told he had just been found in his apartment unconscious. We did learn that he had passed away. And we were expecting him home for winter break the next day. We're talking about a week before Christmas. And I can't tell you deeply enough what an impact that night and for the last 10 years his passing has had on us. Joey, along with my husband and I, moved up to San Ramon Valley when Joey was entering 3rd grade. And so he went through the San Ramon Valley Unified School District, starting in 3rd grade at a local elementary school, moving into middle school, graduated from California High School in 2006. And then we're just really delighted. He's doing great. He's, got his decent grades together. He's moved off to college and he's close enough so we can go visit him pretty easily. So we're really feeling comfortable with the fact he's just 1 state away, a 10-hour drive or a 2 or 3 hour flight away. And I can tell you that there was just no warning. All of a sudden, our son had died. It wasn't like many other families who have, a history of addiction, substance use disorder that has ultimately led to this demise. That wasn't true with Joey. As I started talking immediately, we've just been open. Our family has been since the beginning. We didn't even probably realize there was a stigma so much out there that could have kept us from sharing. But as I'm talking to my family members, our family, our community members, everybody that I knew about what had happened to them, I realized that we weren't alone in not understanding how dangerous the medications we're going to talk about can be. We had no idea that the pill of Xanax and the pill and a half of oxycodone and alcohol that was just over the driving, the legal driving level that Joey had consumed the night he was out with his friends was enough to kill somebody. We knew about other overdoses, especially those that you hear about in the news, the high profile movie stars or whatever who had died from a prescription drug overdose. And we've always assumed it was just you had to take a lot of drugs, that it would take a bottle of whatever to kill you. But we learned 4.5 months after Joey passed away, when we got the toxicology report and the coroner's report, that it was a shockingly low amount of medication, along with a little bit of alcohol, that took his life. And so really a month after Joey passed away, I started speaking out publicly. I felt strongly that it was important that we share what had happened to him to save other families from having to go through, this devastating, situation that we were living with then, of course, still live with today. So everything I do is in Joey's memory. I like to think that he's made a huge mark on this earth in a way that he never would have guessed. He would never have guessed this would have happened to him, nor could we. But I sincerely believe he's making a difference because he represents the reality that this can happen to any one of our families. That's truly the case. We have a national epidemic, and unless you've been personally touched by this, you don't necessarily know what we're dealing with out there. But I can tell you that 2009, there was an epidemic that was brewing, and it's gotten consistently worse since then. In terms of national data, we're always at least a year behind in getting the numbers. But you can see, this is how many people we had die from an overdose of whatever, drugs in 2018. The majority of them were from opioids, which would be either prescribed painkillers or also it can mean heroin and other forms of illicit or illegal opioids that people tend to move over to when they can't afford to get enough, medication, let's just say prescribed opioids given to them each month. But, over time, you just need more and more to keep your habit going. And you can't go to one doctor and get enough, and you can't doctor shop anymore like you used to be able to and get prescriptions from a multitude of doctors. There are systems in place now that weren't there back in 2009. And so that's the reality. And as you can see, the highest rate of non-medical use of prescription medicines is young adults 18 to 25. So drilling that down, and I don't know who's watching today, but just in our local environment alone, over the last 10 years, at least between 2008 and 2018, you can see that in San Ramon, where I live, we've had 22 overdose deaths. 22 families like mine have been impacted irrevocably because of an overdose death. In Danville, 9, and Alamo, 7. But what I want to point out that the reality is we have young people like my son Joey leave their nest, their home. They go off to college. They go off to live their adult lives in whatever way, and they're not making it back home. So the little note down below shows that we had at least 9 other young adults leave our San Ramon Valley area that never came back. Joey's not included in the data here because he died in Arizona. The county there has counted his death, not ours. So anyway, I just wanted to say we have a problem, not just in San Ramon Valley and our communities. Every community in America is being impacted by this. We've got the numbers, but for me, it's the individuals, the families that are being destroyed by this problem. I know I'm linked to every one of these young people that we've lost, and we have multiple people in here from the San Ramon Valley represented. We've got 2 sets of brothers. I can't imagine going through this twice. And yet now I know families that are losing 3 people. Just recently, I learned about a dad and his daughter. It's not just young people we're losing. In fact, the data shows that we lose more people to overdose between the ages of about 25 and close to 60, about 59 or 60 years old, than young people. So typically we don't see young people in the teenage years die so much as young adults and then moving on. And it's because of prescribing. So many of our overdoses are a direct result of legitimate prescribing for legitimate health problems. This misconception is real. There's just a misconception that because a doctor prescribes these medications, they're not as dangerous. But in reality, I've learned very painfully that they can be just as deadly, addictive, and illegal as any drugs out there. There also are no boundaries. So we can think, and I've had a lot of parents over the years come up to say, oh, I think I'm safe because my child is a super great athlete and they wouldn't ever do drugs, or they're a very high performing student. They're on the honor roll, the honor, the dean's list, all those, recognition values for high performing students. But I can tell you that they can absolutely be driven to use medications or otherwise be prescribed them for perhaps a tooth extraction. Most of our young people will eventually have their wisdom teeth out, right? Or they as athletes or even in a car accident may have a legitimate reason for being prescribed, and they can become a victim of this problem. And then, of course, as I mentioned, it's not just kids, it's parents, it's coworkers, it's the elderly. It can be anybody that can grow dependence and addiction to these medications. So you may be thinking, well, Jay, I haven't been personally impacted, but you probably have and may not even realize it. If you've had your car broken into or your home broken into, that's typically, not always probably, but typically it is a crime that is related to drug abuse. It's someone who's desperate to get the stuff that's in your car or in your house. They would rather just go to your medicine cabinet and get your pills because then they don't have to sell something to go, to either sell the pills to make a living or keep their habit going. And I can tell you that every community is living with families, a lot of families that are living with addiction, dealing with substance use disorder, that they're not going to broadcast it because of stigma. They're not going to let you know what's going on, but it's happening. And so I just want to put that out there. We need to be, especially with COVID and everything else going on right now, just know that addiction, substance use disorder is really increasing dramatically. Our overdoses are increasing dramatically. Our mental health issues of all sorts are increasing dramatically. And it's going to, the estimating I mentioned, like we had 78,000 people that died of overdose in 2018. We are hearing predictions that we're going to be over 100,000 people this year that die from overdose. We won't know that for a year or so when the data finally comes out. We'll validate that, but we need to do everything we can right now to limit that as best we can. For anyone who gets caught up in buying or selling or using these prescription medications, there's really no difference than if they had illegal drugs that they were using and selling. So, driving under the influence is still very much the case. Basically, you're impaired. These medications we're going to talk about do make you impaired. And if you're driving, you can easily have an accident and your life can be destroyed just from the legal situation you'll be in. Also, there can be personal risks, and those are the HIV, AIDS, and hepatitis in particular that we know are increasing also along with drug usage, because the reality is people tend to use the paraphernalia. Even if it's a dollar bill or a piece of paper, they roll up to snort or sniff, the drug that they're taking in to make the high come along quicker. That spoon or that straw or that whatever is being passed often among drug users that they're using with, and that can cause these health issues to be transmitted from one person to the other. And of course, substance use disorder, the more you use these, the more likely you're going to develop that. And who can develop a substance use disorder? Really, again, anybody can. It doesn't matter if you're a good student or a great athlete or, you're a grandparent or parent. It can happen to anybody. Here are some of those risk factors that can be predictors per se of, who may develop a substance use disorder. If you have a family history of addiction, no matter what that addiction might be, if it's tobacco or alcohol, you are potentially at more risk because you're genetically connected to that person. And of course, the closer the genetic connection, then the more likely that's going to develop. What we also know now is the earlier young people start to abuse any type of substance, the more likely they are going to develop a substance use disorder. And by the time they get to be a young adult, that's why we start to see a lot of overdoses when young people reach their early 20s, their mid 20s, and even beyond. Most of the ones that do started when they were really young, in their middle school years. We typically are not educating right now in the middle school environment, but we need to. There's a general thought that if we do that, we might drive people to drugs. They'll be curious, kids will be curious. But I will tell you, we have to do a better job. We need to be talking to our middle school kids, even if it's not in the classroom setting. Parents are in a position to start that conversation. We really need to do that. It's very important. And then mental health disorders. There are a lot of people that have not been diagnosed, but especially right now, we're having a lot of anxiety. Almost everybody feels a level of anxiety right now. And if you already had a tendency to have depression or anxiety. Because we're living right now with all these problems in our environment, we're more likely to have those triggers. And so we need to be really careful. We need to be watching over our people. We need to be recognizing the fact that any one of us could be really suffering from what could become a debilitating situation, but also what could drive us towards using substances to try to control that. Alcohol, marijuana usage is going out the roof right now, especially in places like California where it is legal, right? It's not legal for kids, but kids can get it because it's in the home. It's not being necessarily locked up as well as it needs to be. And then another thing that we're learning a lot about, and it's really becoming very, very obvious, but hadn't been talked about so much until now, is childhood trauma and how much that can trigger, a problem with people moving over. It's a self-medicating mechanism, again, like mental health disorders, using substances to try to deal with that. And even learning disabilities can be in that mode. Signs of abuse for our parents on the line, this would be kind of a collection of that. It would be, you know your kids better than anybody or your other family members, and just, are things changing with them? Are they noticeably changing in terms of their mood? There can be visual signs, there can be, mental signs per se. So are they losing weight? Are they not showering like they used to? Are they losing, interest in things that they used to love to do? And then of course, the physical signs are they, unable to walk? Are they unable to speak without a slur in their speech and those sorts of things? So we need to be paying attention to all those things, into each other, not to just yourself and the anxiety you might be suffering from right now. Let's all just be, really in great communication with each other. And I want you to know that we have to lock up our medication, because the majority of those who are abusing medication or misusing it, they're getting it from friends and family. They're getting it straight from our home medicine cabinets or the kitchen cabinet, where that medication's kept, right? So lock up your medications. Get rid of it if you don't need it anymore. And we can easily do that. In California, we've done a great job of putting disposal sites all over the place. You can go to any CVS in Contra Costa County, and I believe also in Alameda County and other counties throughout the Bay Area where we are. Bottom line is, you can get rid of this stuff. There's no reason to hold on to it, because you don't know who's coming into your house. Maybe it's more limited now because of COVID, but on any given day, you have people that could potentially want that medication, and they could be seeking it out, and you're just helping to perpetuate, our country's overall problem. So as you can see, all of these things are true. I want to quickly get into the danger zone drug types. So we'll be talking about opioids, sedatives, and benzodiazepines, and prescription stimulants. So in the case of sedatives and benzodiazepines, our organization's also starting to do a deep dive. The benzodiazepine story, we have a series of lived experience interviews that we've been conducting. Actually, our youth ambassadors are conducting them for us. So if you go over to our YouTube channel, that is capital NCAPDA, you can watch these videos that are really powerful, I believe. And one of them is on benzodiazepines. It's by a woman who basically was prescribed for sleeping disorder. She was initially prescribed Ativan, Ambien, and then Xanax. And bottom line is, her life was completely destroyed. As I've started doing more research on what is it about benzos that are such a problem, what we know is that you can quickly become dependent. Your body will become dependent on it. And that's everybody. It doesn't matter who you are. It's not so much an addiction where you'll go out and rob a bank or whatever to sustain your habit. It's more that your body becomes physically dependent on them, and you cannot just suddenly stop. You have to be carefully weaned off of them. The benzodiazepines that would be an example here include Xanax and Ativan and Valium. Ambien would be more of a sedative for sleep, to help you sleep. None of these medications, though, are meant for long-term usage, because your body becomes dependent on them, and it can really cause some big problems. And I need you to know that Xanax in particular, the reason I have it yellowed, highlighted, is because it is a very sought after drug by our youth, our high school students, our college students. It's generally thought of as just a chill pill. Young people do not have any sense of how dangerous that particular drug can be. You can die from an overdose because it does tend, all of these tend to slow your breathing. If you mix them with alcohol or with another central nervous system depressant like an opioid that we'll talk about also, you can die from it. And I do know people, in fact, someone in Danville who was about 2 days away from graduating from Arizona University when he combined Xanax with alcohol, and he died, again, young person. So I just want to call out these drugs, and if you have or know anybody who has Xanax in their medicine cabinet, any of these drugs, they have to be locked up, and you need to get rid of them and try not to take them any longer than absolutely necessary. And actually, you should look for other ways to manage your anxiety because, and your sleep problems, because this is, in the end, not a good solution for very long at all. And there are good alternatives. In case of the stimulants, this is another one that young people tend to abuse in high school and college. It would be the kids that do not actually have ADHD, which would be a legitimate reason for these medications to be prescribed. So in the case of those that don't have an ADHD problem, any of these effects could be possible. These drugs tend to, unlike the sedatives, they raise everything. They increase the levels of your blood pressure, your heart rate, and all of these different things can happen. Examples could, be like in terms of noticing maybe somebody is abusing these drugs, it would be maybe the angry outburst. Another thing that can happen that's actually not on the sheet is you can have a psychotic break, meaning that all of a sudden your brain is telling you there's something crazy going on. One of my friends in Arizona who I've made since all this happened in our family, I've connected with her, had a reaction that she never could have predicted. Taking Adderall, actually as prescribed, but she'd been over-prescribed by her doctor. She ended up dashing off to her church. She's a very religious woman. With her little 2-year-old in the car, she didn't strap down well enough. Had a car accident, and the little boy died along the way to the church. And in her mind, she was trying to save his life because the devil was after her. That was how crazy, her reaction to this medication ended up being. And there's all sorts of other ones out there too. The thing you need to know again is if your child is prescribed Adderall or any of these other stimulants for a legitimate ADHD problem, they can be a target by other kids at school who want their medication. They can actually be asked to, give it to them or sell it to them, to stay up all night to study for an exam, or to otherwise maybe do, an exceptional job on the ball field. It's not uncommon for even professional athletes to use this medication just as a stimulant. These drugs are very similar in construction to methamphetamine, which would be the illegal version of this medication. Moving over to cough medicine and cold medicine, bottom line is this is a medication that's either over the counter, in which case it's alcohol based, or it can be the prescribed cough medicine and cold medicine. And that would be, it would have codeine in it, which is a painkiller. And so the bottom line is this stuff is abused. I think that cough medicine tastes really bad. I've had it a couple times in my life and it's like, oh, I think I won't bother. But what they do is they mix it with candy. They'll put it in soda to make it taste better because they have to drink quite a bit of it to get the buzz off of it, the high off of it. But they do it all the time. And they have all these different names for this in the center, robodosing and on and on. It's a thing, and young people can easily get their hands on this stuff. The last subject is painkillers. And again, I just want to go back to one of the original slides I shared with you to say that opioids, painkillers of whatever sort, and there are countless numbers of, brand names. This is just a small sampling of them, the most often prescribed, in fact. But these painkillers are really powerful drugs. The higher the dosage for each pill, the more dangerous they potentially are. Over on the left, you can see the Oxycontin pills labeled with an 80. That's 80 milligram strength. They used to have 120 milligram. They had to take it off the market because people are dying way too frequently. 80s are very powerful. Oxycontin 5, 10, 20 would be what, no more than what we would be prescribed, but sometimes this makes its way out there in the, on the street per se. Vicodin is very much prescribed, especially for, it seems, tooth extractions like wisdom teeth extractions. So Vicodin is out there. Codeine, as I mentioned, it can be codeine and Tylenol. It can come in that joint form, but it can also show up in the cough medicine I mentioned. And then Percocet 30s, I will tell you on the street, like that's gold for people who want to abuse painkillers, to get high with. The key is that these medications can slow your and stop your breathing, especially when you start mixing them with alcohol, when you mix them with the sedatives that we talked about. My son died again from one pill of Xanax, a pill and a half of Percocet, the equivalent of Percocet, 30 milligram strength, and he had some alcohol in the system. That's all it took. So when you start to combine these things, it becomes more and more dangerous. There's a combination effect that we call it the synergistic or the multiplier effect. So we are finding that more overdoses than not are from multiple substances. So we have to be really, really careful. And then I just wanted, our last one is the synthetic opioids. So even though these are not prescribed drugs per se, although fentanyl can come in a real, in a prescribed form, in a patch form, a lollipop form, but we're talking here in this slide about the illegal form of fentanyl. That's super easy to make, it's super cheap, and it is super available. It is out there in every community now. The reality of this is it comes in different ways. Right, the biggest source has been China for a number of years, but we're finally getting them to agree to cut the, the manufacturing of it. So now we're starting to see it come in from India. Unfortunately, that's kind of a substitute, a new opportunity for this stuff to come in. And then the pills can be made from the powder. I was told by our DEA representative on our county coalition just this last week that they just busted a big illegal pill mill, they call them, in Concord, where hundreds, I think it was actually thousands of these pills that contained fentanyl had been manufactured to be sold on the street, per se, by drug dealers that are out there. And these pills can look just like the real thing if they do a good job with them. They can show up, we have seen them show up in the form of Xanax, again, one of the sought after drugs by our young people and others, and also in the form of Norco, which is a painkiller, in the form of Vicodin. The lesson here is that because it can come in powder form, of course, too, that's the base ingredient, base way it shows up. It can be sprinkled in any drug out there. It's showing up in other things like cocaine and heroin, and even methamphetamine. So we now have people who have methamphetamine addiction who are dying from an opioid overdose because fentanyl has somehow made its way into their methamphetamine source, their drug. So I can't stress this enough. It is so dangerous out there right now. Fentanyl is everywhere. Anybody that gets a pill from anything other than a legitimate pharmacy, and that means not online, because we have a lot of fake pharmacies online too. Our young people that have credit cards can go online and they can pull up what they think is a legitimate drugstore, and it's not. And fentanyl is often shipped directly to them without us even knowing it. So we've got to be super careful. I wanted to show you the signs, the physical signs. We talked about some of those things. When somebody gets pulled over by a police officer, this is what they would be looking at. First thing, they look at the pupils. So if, given the light, if they have pinpoint or constricted pupils, that's a sign that opioids could be on board per se. They could have opioids in their system. And reversely, the stimulants show up as dilated pupils. So as a parent, that's what I would be looking for. If anything, like other signs are looking strange, check those pupils out. And what you want to do is intervene as soon as you can. Parents have the sense. We know our kids really well. So trusting your gut is really important, I believe. Even casual and experimental use in teens can be a cause for alarm. I know a lot of parents are really struggling right now with marijuana use. They know their kids are using marijuana, and they almost feel helpless in stopping it because it is so accepted. But I will tell you that they, depending on where they get their marijuana, if it's not from a dispensary, it can contain fentanyl. We're seeing it show up in fentanyl. It's also a cause for alarm because although our adult brains can manage these substances at a better level, our teen brains are not fully developed. And so when you start to submit them, expose them to chemicals of any sort, high THC levels that we see now in marijuana, even alcohol, so much vaping going on out there, and vaping sometimes with the extracted THC from marijuana, it is cause for alarm, and we need to do everything we can to get it stopped while you still can, before it leads to a serious dependence and addiction leading down the road, because these things happen potentially. There is a great circle of care that we need to be willing to ask for help from. So youth, we've got our school counselors, our professional services, and you'll see some of those at the end of the presentation. Any of these can be of great support. And then I'm going to now stop and turn this over to Nick, who is one of our Speakers Bureau members, and he's actually an outreach coordinator for NCAPDA now. He's going to share his personal story, but also he's going to share life-saving information about what can be used to overturn an overdose that we all as parents need to be aware of. So I'm going to turn this over to you, Nick.
All right, thanks, April.
You're welcome.
My name is Nick, and thanks for having me. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about naloxone, which is a opioid overdose antidote. And it's becoming more and more common to see this, and it's a miracle. It's a lifesaver, and it doesn't hurt anybody. It's literally like the equivalent of how if someone's having a heart attack or a cardiac arrest, they have a defibrillator, the shocking pads to bring them back. This is like that equivalent for someone who's having an opioid overdose. And it's really, it comes in a couple forms. There's a nasal spray form, which you can see there on the left side of the screen. This is the version that NCAPDA actually distributes in the rescue kits. You can also find it as a injection or an auto injector, sort of like an EpiPen there on the right side. Thanks. So one thing, it's really important to be able to recognize the opioid overdose signs. So if you happen to have this antidote for opioid overdoses, being able to recognize it when it's happening is really important, because unfortunately, we're starting to see it everywhere with those numbers April showed you in the earlier slide, with 69,000 people dying every year, and this was 2018, from an overdose, with 69, I think, % of that, or 70% of that being opioids. Just to make those numbers seem more real, that's like an airplane of 200 people crashing every day to reach that number. So it's unfortunately becoming more and more common to see this, like in public transportation, on the street, at get-togethers, anywhere is possible. So to be able to recognize it can be a lifesaver, especially if you have one of these kits. So them being unresponsive and not being able to rouse them, or they're not speaking, is one of the first obvious signs. So if you went up to them and were able to shake them or pinch their neck, or rub their sternum, which are the most common ways to try and wake somebody up, and they don't, or they're not speaking, and then you just can't wake them up, that's one obvious sign. Loss of consciousness, so they're passed out, kind of like being unresponsive. Their breathing or their heartbeat could be slowed or stopped, and this is something that you'll see because of it being a central nervous system depressant. It acts on that part of the brain that's supposed to regulate those things and slows it down. They could be basically drowning without getting enough oxygen. So their breathing could be really, really slow, and their heartbeat could be really slow. Their fingernails or their lips could turn blue or purple. These are the first tissues in the body that you'll notice that hypoxia in. And it's because they're not getting that oxygen. It's basically like they're drowning. And because of their slowed breathing and depressed nervous system, they could be actually like choking on their tongue or snoring like a gurgle as they struggle to even get those slow breaths in. They could be pale or clammy because of their blood pressure being low. And then also nausea is a very common side effect of opioids. So the first thing that should happen, even if you have this kit, even if you have naloxone, which is a life-saving medication, the antidote for the overdose, the most important thing is to call 911. That's number one, because even if you have this, the emergency medical system will have, the EMS will have more resources. They'll have more of the antidote, they'll have more Narcan, and they'll be able to take this person to emergency room at a hospital, which is where they should be. So it's important to tell them when you call 911, if you see this happening, that the breathing has slowed or stopped. I can't wake them up. Give an exact location so they can get there as fast and as efficiently as possible. And then if you happen to know that they're using drugs, let them know what kind. If there's alcohol, benzodiazepines, Ambien, or opioids, or a mix, like if you know that, that's important information for them so they can be prepared when they arrive. So this antidote, which you could have on you, so like you call 911 and now you can administer this if you see this happening, and you can literally save their life. You can bring them back from the dead with this. You just place the nozzle. It's like a Flonase allergy medicine that you would use. You just put it in their nostril and you squeeze it. The spray will go in even if they're not breathing. All it has to do is reach their sinus capillary bed and it will go into their bloodstream. You do it again in 2 to 5 minutes if there's no response from the first one. And then if you can or you're able to, provide rescue breathing because it's more important that they're getting oxygen at this point. And the instructions for that, it's like a CPR, tilting the head back, open mouth, pinch the nose, 2 breaths slowly, every 5-6 seconds, and continue until they can start breathing again or the help gets there. It's important also to place them in this position, which is the rescue position. The reason for this is because of that side effect of nausea and basically their body being poisoned by the opioids. If they are lying down facing upwards and they do vomit, they can aspire that vomit back into their, and breathe it in and basically die from suffocating on that. So this is also important for alcohol overdose or alcohol poisoning. The person should always be in this position so that their airway can stay open and patent. Important things to know about the naloxone. It lasts 30 to 90 minutes. So be aware that if they've taken lots of powerful opioids like fentanyl in their system, the naloxone can wear off after that 30 to 90 minutes, and the opioid, which is still in their system, will take hold again and they can go back into their overdose. This is why it's important to have 911 called so that the professionals are on their way. And also to be aware of this, people who are given Narcan can sometimes wake up. It's a startling sensation to them, I suppose, that they can wake up and be combative and actually start throwing punches. I've seen in the emergency room, people being Narcaned, waking up and then just becoming violent all of a sudden. So that it's important to realize that could happen, just to be careful. And yeah, so the emergency room, this is where they need to be, because then also it's important to note that if this person has overdose, it's very likely that they do have a substance use disorder, and a place where they can receive exposure to the possibility of recovery and treatment would be in the hospital, in the emergency room, in addition to having all of those extra resources health-wise. So monitoring that person once you've given the Narcan is very important. For several hours at the ER by the friends, family. If they won't go to the emergency room, you need to stay with them because of that 30 to 90 minute expiration date on the naloxone. Naloxone can only reverse opioid overdoses, but it can still help if opioids are one of those, like April was talking about, the synergistic or multiplier effect. If someone has had benzodiazepines or alcohol or other central nervous system depressants in addition to whatever amount of opioids, naloxone will still reverse that opioid portion, and it could be what is needed to bring them back. And then the most important thing I think on this slide is it doesn't hurt anybody. So if you're in doubt, if you think you see those signs that were on that last slide, you can give this to somebody who's unresponsive, and it's not going to hurt them. It can only help them. It can only bring them back. So who should carry naloxone? I honestly just think everybody should. I think just like how libraries, gyms, public institutions have those AEDs, those defibrillators on the wall, I think that they should have a Narcan kit there too. I have one in my trunk. I have one in my house. My parents have one. I think I've given, I've distributed them and trained like lots of my friends just to have them on, because if you have them on your person and you see someone who this is happening to, you can just save their life. And just how amazing is that if you just have it on you? So I think everybody should have it, especially somebody who knows somebody who's in an active addiction or is released from a treatment facility, someone who's recently released from jail or prison, or they could just be taking a high dosage that's prescribed for pain problems legitimately. How do you get it? You can actually get a prescription for it these days. It's sometimes being given in addition to a pain medication prescription. Pharmacy will have it. I think it costs like $10 or so from the pharmacy, but you can get it for free many places: recovery clinics, needle exchange clinics, and us, NCAPDA, and then also this website, which is really amazing, naloxoneforall.org. All you do is go there, put in your address, and it will be mailed to you for free.
And then if I could just interject real quickly, with the pharmacy over the counter, if you have insurance, it may cost you only $10, but it can be at least $125 for Narcan if you have to just buy it without that kind of medical insurance support, just to be sure. So, if you can't afford that, then these other methods are really a good way to go. So, Nick, did you want to share anything about your personal story that would help supplement what you've shared already?
Sure. So my real main reason for being here is to be able to share with you guys my personal story and my experience with addiction and with substance use disorder. The main takeaway from my story, I feel, is that addiction does not discriminate, and that it really can happen to anybody. I don't have and didn't have any of those risk factors that were on that slide. And what I think is really important is that through my youth and through growing up, school, high school, I never had anybody give a talk like this or a presentation like this, and never educated me on it. So I think that's really important to hear a personal story so that you can attach like a story to that information. And hopefully, take it to heart. My story is that I had a great childhood. I had a great life all the way through, like, doing well academically in high school, getting into university, and then basically getting into medical school. And in my 2 years before, I think it was 2 years before I started medical school, I was working at a hospital, and I was coming home one night and I had an accident. I slipped, it was raining, and I grabbed the top of this metal sign and it slid across my hand, and it tore my hand open. It was a very serious injury, and I severed the digital nerves, the arteries, and the tendon. And I had to have a hand surgeon put my hand back together. And this was in 2000, I think 2011. And this doesn't happen anymore. But so that surgeon, he prescribed me for the pain management for the next couple months, hundreds of oxycodone at once. Like, he gave me all of it at once. And when he did that, he only said to me one sentence, which I feel is very insufficient to like instill in me a sense of caution about this medication, which is very, very powerful, very, very dangerously addictive chemical. He just said, this could be habit forming. That was it. So I went home with that medication and took it as prescribed. But just because of the nature of these addictive chemicals and how they work on your motivation and reward system in your brain, I became obsessed with it. It didn't take more than a couple, like the first couple doses before I realized that it felt like I couldn't stop thinking about it. I would just count the minutes down till the next dose. And it didn't take more than a week for me to start taking more than I should have. A couple weeks into it, and I was already addicted to this medication, not just physically, but psychologically as well, even though I don't think at the time I was aware of that psychological component. So what happened with me is I continued to use it until the script ran out. And when it did, I got sick because of the chemical hooks in that medication cause a physical dependence. So your body goes into a withdrawal. No matter who you are, you'll have a withdrawal if you've had exposure to it for a long enough time. And because I became obsessed with it and wanted to use it compulsively, I found other ways to get it. And it wasn't that hard, which is really unfortunate. And so I continued to use into my first year of medical school, and my use got worse and worse. It just got, there's no ceiling for tolerance for opioids, and it's very expensive. So I just used more and more stronger versions of it until I was using heroin intravenously. It only took about 2 years to get to that point. And eventually it caught up with me. I couldn't perform academically. And like one of those signs in the earlier slides, I lost interest in everything that was important to me before. I traded in and sacrificed all these pieces of me that made me who I was to keep using this because I'd lost control. The drug had taken control. And eventually I was able to get into recovery and stop. And it's just been the most incredible, like, I am just so grateful for this like chance to get my life back, which it is back now. And it's really amazing that I've had this chance, but I know lots of people that are still struggling with it. And like the major thing is that if I had asked for help earlier, I feel like I could have gotten the help I needed. And my addiction lasted 5 years. I could have maybe stopped earlier, like after a year or so, if the stigma of addiction was one of the components that made it very, very hard for me to want to ask for help. I didn't want to admit to anybody, to myself even, especially family, friends, and people that cared about me, that this had happened to me, because I was afraid of their disappointment. And it's common for people to associate addiction with a moral failing instead of it actually being a brain disease, which it is. And so I feel like just awareness around that is very important. And just if, starting a discussion with somebody who might be young and impressionable, I think is important to open and make them feel safe about talking about those kind of things, because asking for help is something I wish I had done early. So yeah, that's about all I have.
Well, that's a lot, Nick, and a very powerful story. I love hearing it every time, because it shows that, first of all, recovery is possible. And it also shows that anyone can be susceptible to this illness. So thank you so much for sharing it.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I know we all do. So then what can we all do? Take action. I mean, educating yourselves about this is a good first introduction to this topic, but learn as much as you can. We have a website, we have Facebook, we have YouTube, and we're just one entity out there that does. There's a lot of information out there. Go home. If you're home already, just look at your medicine cabinets after this presentation. See what you've got. Lock it up or get rid of it. Again, the pharmacies, CVS, some Walgreens, and police stations have this drop-off opportunity for us now. It's easy to get rid of it. And then consider joining, if not our coalition. We have our local coalition in Contra Costa County, and there are coalitions all over the Bay Area, all over the country you can become active with. And then in terms of medicine safety, from this point on, if you don't already do it, if you're sitting in front of a doctor, make sure you know what the side effects are from the medication. Ask them, ask the pharmacist. You may even want to do a Google check on the meds. I do myself, just to make sure I really know what I'm getting myself into. And certainly ask if that medication can be addictive. As Nick indicated, it may not be, the doctor may not volunteer this stuff, but you need to ask. Make them, challenge them to give you the information you need. And then explore other treatment options too, because there are some really good opportunities to avoid getting into potential trouble with, a potentially addictive and harmful drug. These are some of those alternative treatment options. Monica herself does some wonderful work in helping people manage anxiety. So Monica, you've got your screen behind Inner Sanctuary Wellness. And so bottom line, check out the opportunities to find a way around this. If you have other opportunities for us to present, if you want to volunteer in any capacity, also help us get the word out to businesses. We want more naloxone out there, just as Nick mentioned. If they have a kit, they can save a life. And we do have youth opportunities in the form of internships. And so with that, I do want to introduce, here's a resource slide I'll keep up. But I'd like to introduce, we have two of our youth ambassadors with us today. So I would like to introduce first Manu, who's going to speak to us about his perceptions in terms of what's going on really in the teen world, and they'll be available to answer questions as well as we move towards the end of our presentation. So is Manu here? I'm not actually seeing him on my slide. Yes,
Yeah,
there you are. Okay, I'm turning it over to you to Manu.
Yeah, thank you, April. My name is Manu, and I've had the privilege of being a youth ambassador for NCAPDA for almost a year now. And I decided to join this organization in around September of last year after seeing many of my fellow high school students suffer or be affected by substance abuse disorder. I really wanted to educate myself and my peers about the danger of these drugs. And I feel like the effect of these drugs, such as nicotine, weed, and Adderall, and many more, on the youth population is a topic that must be brought to more attention. High school students, parents, and teachers need to be more aware of this issue. And with my time with NCAPDA, I have had the pleasure of having amazing opportunities, which have allowed me to educate my peers and learn more about the reality of our drug epidemic. From my perspective, I believe that students need to be more educated and educated better on the consequences of using such drugs or drinking alcohol underage. Peer pressure, academic pressure, and even curiosity, in my opinion, are the main reasons why students begin taking drugs. And in parties and other social situations, many feel socially inclined to take such drugs because they don't want to be the odd one out. And I've seen it myself. Many teens see taking drugs as a way to become popular or socially accepted. Especially in my school district, SRVUSD, competition and academic pressure are main reasons for why anxiety and depression are among students. The stress eventually gets to a lot of them, and they have to resort to unhealthy ways to reduce it, such as drugs or drinking. I believe that parents need to be more careful when pushing their children and have to be aware of their feelings or mental health. I've personally seen a lot of my friends whose parents have pushed them to beyond their capabilities and have found themselves being unhappy and filled with anxiety. As a high school student myself, I have seen that most high schoolers become less academically concerned, distance themselves from close relationships, and start acting like an entirely different person when relying on drugs. And these are like the main signs I've seen that students show and what parents need to look for. And my advice would be, if you're a parent, it would be a great idea to begin talking to like the teachers and reaching out to the friends of your child to see if they see any drastic change in their personality or energy. And I think especially in today's society, I feel like the generational and societal and cultural gap for teens and their parents is also a driving factor of why kids are turning to unhealthy substances to provide them with relaxation or relief that they usually are unable to get. And a major problem is that before I joined NCAPDA, I had relatively no knowledge about how bad the drug epidemic was, especially prescription drugs. However, after learning and going through many great experiences, I've been able to become more aware about this issue at hand. This kind of shows how majority of high schoolers have no idea how bad drugs are for you and what consequences they might have. And I believe not enough attention is brought to the issue and the children are suffering for it. And especially in the school system, I feel like health and science teachers need to spend more time and do a better job about educating their students on drugs, and the same goes for their parents. It is so easy for students to get hands on drugs, as they can get it from friends, older siblings, and even drug dealers. Things such as pills, marijuana, and even vape pens are very accessible to the youth, but they're still very dangerous. There are many cases recently where teens will get their drugs from medicine cabinets and abuse their or their parents' medication. Prescription drug safety is something that is rarely talked about among parents or in the school system, something we're trying to change. However, this issue is rapidly growing and people need to know about it. I've seen that substances such as cough medicines are becoming more common for high schoolers, especially in parties, and are becoming much more addictive, kind of how April talked about earlier in the slides. All this being said, as a student, I believe more resources need to be devoted to this issue in the household and at school. And I really hope me sharing my perspective will help parents out there, and I appreciate you all for listening. Thank you. And I would like to hand it off to my fellow youth ambassador, Shreya.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shreya. I am also a youth ambassador at NCAPDA. I'm really excited to be here today and sort of just share my perspective on how parents specifically can help their teenagers out and try to prevent this ongoing issue of prescription drug abuse. Before I introduce my perspective into this webinar, I would first like to establish something. Prescription drug abuse is something that can happen to anyone. This is a prevalent issue in today's society. It is not something that has just been popularized on TV. When I was going into high school, I was not aware about how much prescription drugs could be misused in our society. I did not understand that people could use these drugs outside of the purpose of medicine. I only understood that there were certain drugs, such as street drugs like weed and Molly, that people could use if they wanted to for certain purposes. However, I did not understand that prescription drugs could also be misused. 1 out of every 7 students misuse a prescription drug, meaning that they use this drug for purposes outside of medicinal purpose. This is a real issue in today's society, and it can happen to anyone. That being said, I know a lot of parents may question to themselves, how can I help my child? How can I help prevent this issue from happening in further generations? How can I stop my child from actually engaging with these drugs? The answer to this is education. Education is really important. And something that I'd like to emphasize that April and Manu had both mentioned is that education, it is never too early to educate your child about this issue. A lot of parents may find it easy to shield their child completely away from drugs and completely not touch on the subject of drugs at all. However, you must educate your child on the importance of staying away from these drugs and the consequences it could cause to their self and health. This is really, really important because children who have not grown up with proper education about prescription drugs may accidentally use them in the future because they are not aware of the serious effects it may cause to their health. For example, many students may find that other students are also using prescription drugs and may use them as well on the influence of their friends. There may be someone that comes up to them and says, hey, this drug is something that you can use to take a test. It'll help you stay awake throughout the entire test. I know you've been up all night studying. You can use this drug to utilize it and help you stay up for this test and perform really well. Teens may not know that that drug is actually Adderall, which we've already touched on has major side health effects that cause detrimental health effects to the child. Early education is extremely important, which is why I think that it is really, really important for parents to not shield their children away from this topic, but rather remove the stigma surrounding talking about drugs and addiction and actually introduce this topic to their children and talk about it with them and talk about the safety measures that they can take to stay away from these harmful drugs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we're moving into our Q&A time, but I just want to thank our youth ambassadors, not just for today, but for everything you're doing to make a difference. Your youth voices are very powerful and right on. Your message is right on. Thank you. So Monica, go ahead and take us into our Q&A.
Yes, first of all, thank you, Nick, so much for sharing your story. It takes a lot of courage and a big heart to share your own personal story to help out others. I'm sure it will help a lot of people and save many lives. Thank you so much to both our youth ambassadors for sharing their perspective. Believe me, as a parent, it really helps me. Now, the first question we have is about the gummies or the jelly beans that are available, which are laced with some kind of a drug, which we are not too aware of, but are easily available now to students in school. Can you share a little more about it? I hear that it is easily available on Amazon or other websites. Is that true? It's also maybe available in the form of cookies. Is that true? Is that easily available? April, do you know anything about it?
I wasn't sure who you were directing that to, Monica. Yeah, all that stuff is available. I mean, certainly, you know, the dispensaries, the marijuana dispensaries have all those different forms, and I'm sure it's available online. Again, I can't stress enough that anything you do not get from a legitimate source, even if it's not really legitimate for young people to use. I mean, the key is if it doesn't come from a legitimate source, you know, a dispensary that has all the safety measures in place, supposedly, et cetera, you're risking the possibility of having a tainted product, which can have that fentanyl, that deadly fentanyl in it. So I'm sure all of that is readily available to any young person who would like to take advantage of it.
So Manu or Shreya, would you like to add something to it?
Yeah, sure. I feel like these kind of gummies, brownies, or cookies, anything like that, they're very readily available, and many people can get it. Like I said earlier, like from fellow school members, which is very common, as they may get it from older friends or siblings. So that's what I'm saying. There's a lot of sources they can get it from, and I think parents just need to be aware of that and make sure like kind of monitor how like your kids are spending their money too. If you see like start to notice some money missing from like your purse or your son's bank account, you can kind of see like an issue there, because like it's unexplained money loss. So yeah, those are the main reasons, like main kind of ways they can get it.
I agree completely with everything Manu had mentioned. You definitely need to look out for those major indicators or signs, like money being lost from your wallet and stuff like that. But another thing that you can look for is behavioral changes within your child. Are they behaving differently? Do they look different? These are really things that you definitely need to watch out for. And as April stated earlier, these are definitely available and are extremely popular in high school and in high school parties. One thing that I would advise all parents to do is I would suggest informing your kids about this, because this, again, is something that's very popular in high school. And I would suggest that not only do you inform your kids about this, but try to restrict them a little bit on taking food from other people, because you never really know if that food is laced with something.
Thank you so much for sharing. We have another one. April, this might be for you. Is prescription medication overdose combined with alcohol make it so dangerous, or just medication overdose by itself can be lethal?
Both of them. It depends on the amount you take. You can easily overdose just on oxycodone or Oxycontin or any of the painkillers, or if you have enough of the sedatives or benzodiazepines, you can overdose just on that medication. And, you know, some people say, well, how much does it take to overdose? I don't know. Everybody's body is different, right? But typically, it would be more than was prescribed or would normally be prescribed to somebody for a legitimate problem. But at the same time, the more you start to expand beyond that one drug, even if you're taking that as prescribed, and then you add on to it another central nervous system depressant, as Nick had mentioned, that's when you start to run into a greater and greater risk So the more you add on, the more likely, even if you're taking lower dosage amounts for each of the individual gradients, they combine and that multiplier effect comes into play.
Thank you, April. We have another question. Somebody's asking if prescription medication can be so dangerous, why is it not more controlled for the patients? Example, why is it not just administered in the clinic only? What would you say for that?
Well, that would be, I think, nearly impossible. There are so many people out there that have a legitimate need for some of these medications. You couldn't possibly have enough clinics to manage, everybody coming into a clinic and you just getting your dosage for the day there. It's just not practical. There's a new law in place, though, that I was really happy to see. And in fact, our organization helped to support the passage of in California. And that says that a doctor now is supposed to have a conversation with you about the dangers of opioids in particular. And in fact, they are supposed to also suggest that you consider filling the prescription they should be offering you for naloxone. So you're going home with, that double, that backup, for overdose, potential overdose. And what studies have shown is that where the doctor really takes the time to do that, and they're legally required, but not all of them are up to speed yet. But where they do that, like if you can imagine, if you're sitting in front of a doctor and says, okay, here's your, the painkiller I'm going to give you, but I'm going to give you this overdose medication too. You might say, wait a minute, maybe my pain isn't that bad, right? Studies have shown that it actually reduces the opioid prescribing levels. And so over time, one of the other side things we do is we actually work to educate doctors and medical prescribers to do what we can to reduce prescribing levels. So they are reaching out to other modalities of treatment and prescribing physical therapy or other forms of exercise that can help you move beyond your pain. So there are other ways that we're tackling it. It's not really practical to just have everybody go to a clinic to get their daily dosage. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think with my clients have seen that sometimes you've had an old injury and then you have a fall again, which is not as serious, but there's a little pain and we tend to self-medicate ourselves. Okay, I have this painkiller lying in my cabinet. Why don't I take one more? And that's how things can start.
It can. And I want to point out too, that there is an expiration date for all the medications out there, right? The box, the container, whatever will show you what that date is. I want you to know that medication just doesn't stop working on the day that the expiration date is. It continues, and in fact, some medications actually grow more potent over time, which is interesting. So it's still super important to get rid of it, even if it shows that it's expired. We want to get rid of that medication and not go back and use old medication for an old injury. And maybe, like you said, your reoccurrence of the injury may not warrant that kind of medication anyway. You need to go get a fresh look at it from a medical professional.
On that note, April, can you please tell us again, where can we dispose of the expired medication?
Sure. It may be a little more tricky now because of COVID and we're supposed to stay home, right? As best we can. But you can still go into the pharmacies, the CVSs in particular. They have a nationwide program. In Contra Costa County, every CVS has a drop-off box. Some Walgreens do, not all of them do now. Walmart is going to start putting their drop-off boxes in across the country. I haven't seen it in their local one here. Our police stations have them. Every police station has a drop-off box. Worst case, you can get these mailers from the pharmacies and you can actually put the drugs in the mailer and you can ship them off. It costs a couple of dollars, where the drop-off in the boxes that are existing is free, of course. And there's no problem with that. Absolute worst case, they don't want you to put them in the trash cans because that goes into our water system ultimately. It goes into landfill and then it gets seeped out into our water system. But if you're really desperate, you can get kitty litter, use kitty litter or coffee grounds and mix up the medication. The ideal way would put it in a baggie, put water in it, squish it all up so it becomes really unusable. And then you can throw it also in the kitty litter or coffee grounds, so people won't be, that might come into contact with it, even in the trash environment, won't be, enticed into taking the meds out. So, but you want to get rid of it. What happens if you take it into the pharmacies and such? It gets incinerated. It goes off to incineration points. We have one down in Crow's Landing, which is kind of down, Highway 5 heading towards Los Angeles, maybe, a third of the way down to Los Angeles from the Bay Area. But they also have incineration points in Texas and other places. So that doesn't affect the, you don't want to throw it in the toilet or down our water receptacles like that at all. That's really impacting our water system in a negative way, studies have shown.
And if I'm not wrong, it's important to take those expired medication in their original bottles to wherever you're dropping off, right? Not put them in a Ziploc and just take them like that. What if you get caught in between on your way there? You could get.
Well, that's true. What you want to do is bring the baggie with you. And when you get to the police station or the pharmacy, then you remove. You want to make sure that if you were to get pulled over, you have an accident or whatever, you don't have a baggie of drugs. That they're in the original containers, they have your name on them, they're yours. And then once you get to your deposit place, you put them in the baggie and take that in. And then of course you can throw away the containers in the regular trash. And normally you'd want to mark out your personal information just to be safe. So, yeah.
So April, we have one more question here for you. Can painkillers like Advil also be addictive and dangerous?
They can be dangerous because some people have, they can affect your gastro system. So you could end up with a bleeding ulcer, but they are not addictive. The Tylenol, if you were to take too much Tylenol, that can affect your liver. So you do want to follow directions that, as I mentioned in one of my earlier slides, read the label, take exactly as directed, whether it's over-the-counter meds or it is a prescribed medication. Any drug can be dangerous if taken wrong, or if your body, you need to read the labels to say, are you pregnant? Okay, this drug is not for someone who's pregnant. There are warning signs on all the drug labels and containers, so packaging per se. And then, do we have any questions for our young people? Because this is the opportunity for our youth ambassadors to answer those, really important questions that parents may have out there.
Yes, we have a question for the youth also. Well, the first question is, how do you think, what resources can parents use to get educated? And also what I mean to say is, do you feel comfortable going up to your parents and talking to them about it and telling them what resources they can use to get educated and how big this problem is? Do you think you're comfortable to do that?
Yeah, in my opinion, personally, I have parents who are very understanding about this sort of issue. They have like some prior knowledge about it. They're pretty well educated on the issue of prescription drug abuse. But just in general, because this is such a big problem, this is an underlying problem in society, I do feel obligated to tell my parents about it. Even if I didn't really have like a good personal connection with my parents, I would still feel obligated and comfortable to go up to them, talk to them about these resources, because you never know, it could really save a life.
Yeah, I agree. I've also been able to have such discussions with my parents, but for some kids who are like feel more shy or unable to do so with their parents, I feel like some parents need to take the initiative of finding resources online, such as NCAPDA, to like to show like their kids and kind of educate them better.
Also, do both of you, Shreya, Manu, do you think there's a stigma attached to having this talk, or does that stigma differ by community and generation?
Definitely. I definitely think that in every community, there is some sort of stigma. It can be in any form. It depends on the community that you live in. There are certain communities where substance abuse is something that's completely unheard of. People who have been abusers of like prescription drugs or any harmful substance of that sort, there are certain communities where where they are completely shunned. And there are certain communities where people just simply feel uncomfortable sharing their experiences with others, which is why I believe that organizations like NCAPDA, they're really important. It's really important to normalize conversation about this, because again, if you don't talk about your issues, if you don't talk about your problems with other people, they can escalate really quickly and really easily. So it's really important to have these organizations, and for kids who do feel comfortable having these conversations with their parents, to actually have these conversations, because that does contribute to normalizing the sort of underlying stigma surrounding this topic.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, I feel like a big part of it is like our generational gap between our parents, because during their childhood and adolescent years, like this topic wasn't highly discussed and many people used to shoo away from it. So it's kind of hard for them to get used to that, as well as a cultural difference, as many people have parents that have a different, like come from like other countries or other parts of the country, which which makes it harder for them to be more understanding of their mental health and like be okay discussing this issue.
Thank you. Thank you, Cher. Thank you, Manu, for sharing that. What would be, we have a few more minutes, so just Manu, Cher, what would be an advice for you, for us parents to do? How do what I hear as a parent is that the teens are not comfortable to go up to talk to their parents because of the reaction that is expected. Either they are, if they go and tell their parents, okay, my friend just tried vaping, the parents react as if the friend is a drug addict and you should not be going and associating yourself with them. Maybe you also have seen or heard something like that. So what do you think should be my reaction as a parent when I hear something like that, and what can I do about it?
That is a really good question. So basically, I feel that since we were talking about stigma earlier, I do think that there is a lot of stigma surrounding actually going up to your parents and starting a conversation, because the kids are scared, right? They never really know or understand how their parents would react, because they feel like, oh, like I don't want to disappoint my parents. I don't know how they'll react. I don't want them to get upset at me. I feel like in this case, because there already is an underlying stigma, there needs to be some sort of change within the parents. And I think that change sort of comes from the fact that I think the parents actually need to start the conversation with the kid, rather than the kid feeling too like obligated or scared to go up to their parents and start the conversation. So any parents who are watching this, I really, really encourage you to go to your kid, sort of start this conversation. Normalize talk about it around your house. Normalize the fact that there is such a thing as prescription drug abuse. There is such a thing as substance abuse. Highlight really the consequences of the actions of that people who are abusers take, and really try to help your kids to understand what the consequences overall of their health could be with these prescription drugs. So I would really encourage parents to do that. It might be a bit awkward to have that conversation with your kid at first, but it will definitely make a huge difference. And as all of us have brought up before, this could literally change someone's life. It is never too early to educate your kid about this. So I really encourage parents to do so.
Shreya, I have a real question that, that stems from lots of information I've received from different sources, and that is that parents need to know that, and see if you can validate this. So you and Nanya, parents don't think their kids listen to them, right? It's like, I can talk, and they just do not listen. But how would you respond to that? Do kids listen? Do you care what your parents think? how much guidance do you really in the end take from your parents?
It's a really good question again. So I do feel, in my opinion, I believe that if something comes from a loved one, and if the conversation really comes from your heart, if it's something that, if you're really showing your kid that this is an important issue and you really and truly care about their health, you really and truly believe that they could potentially be affected by this in some case, if you really go up to them and have like a heart-to-heart discussion about this rather than just like spitting facts like, hey, vaping is bad, this is what a vape pen looks like, rather than just spamming them with facts. If you really engage with them, a heart-to-heart discussion, kids will appeal to that. Kids will appeal to emotion rather than just facts, which sort of is like in one ear, out the other, right? So which is why I feel that if parents sort of engage in a more emotional discussion about this, kids will be more obligated to listen.
Yeah, and from my perspective and my experiences, I've seen like coming from my friends and myself as well, I've seen that like in such sensitive discussions or situations, a lot of times parents like are not fully open-minded and listen like to what the kids have to say. Kind of like the example you brought up earlier. And that causes a lot of problems with trust and just kind of you said, April, how a lot of the kids don't listen to their parents. But if both sides are able to be open-minded and listen to each other, I feel like that'll be much better. And yeah, like I feel like if there's less judgment, kind of like how you said, oh, if this person vapes a drug, if there's less judgment and more like educating, like being involved and being done, I feel like that will kind of help us take the step further and help put their kids on the right path.
Yeah, so being willing to listen, right, and not just be one-way transmission. So here's to do that. It's like, well, okay, listen to me, but you know, in the end, having a two-way conversation, it sounds like it's really important.
Thank you. I may have to interrupt here because we have only a couple of minutes left.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. I mean, today's conversation can segue into so many different seminars already. I mean, I can see parent teacher, parent students. I mean, and April, it was so useful. I mean, this is my third seminar with you, and I feel I'm learning every time something new.
Yeah,
I mean,
great.
it's amazing. It's amazing. Thank you so much for coming here. I want to thank Monica, who is on the board of directors of NCAPDA, and she has her full-time, commitment to helping people with the mental, creating mental awareness, giving them that respite by offering meditation and mindfulness classes. And she's also a volunteer with Seva. I really thank you, Monica, for coming here and facilitating this wonderful seminar. I thank you, Shreya, and I thank you, Manu, for your wonderful perspective. I wish more high schoolers benefit from you. I wish you become the voice of all the high schoolers around the globe, and let them see what you see and let them accept what you see. And Nick, I mean, I was floored by you last time I met you, and today again, you really, you come out and you share your story, and that comes straight from your heart. And I can't thank you enough on behalf of Seva for just coming and being here and helping all of us learn so many things. Thank you for making us all aware, empowered, and trying to be safe. Thank you, all of you, and I think it's a wrap.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is